So my name is Austin Ash. I'm the Associate Director for Undergraduate Education at MIT Sloan, and want to welcome everybody to this program. We're really excited that you've taken out your time out of your day to join this program, Engineering Social Change, Racial Equity in the Workplace. In the era of Zoom fatigue, your presence here is a clear statement that continuing these conversations about race, racial justice, diversity, equity and inclusion, and social justice is important. It also reflects the idea that exploring those elements through the lens of individual and collective stories is critical to the broadening of our understanding of we as a society. So before we leap into the real part of this discussion, just some few housekeeping items. First, it's really important to mention that this was an event in a collaborative sense, but was really the idea of our moderator, Nacho Wana, who was a Course 15 major before graduating last year, and then subsequently starting his own public speaking business, and before this spring preparing for his full-time role, at Analysis Group in Boston. So Nacho, just wanted to say thank you for your vision and your leadership through this process, as it was the catalyst that brought us all together today. So thank you for that. Next, we'd like to get a quick sense of where people are joining us from. So we're gonna put up a quick poll. And so if you wouldn't mind, I'm gonna launch it right now. Just share kind of where you're joining us from. Can everybody see that? Great. All right, I see that it's moving. And so while that's moving, I'll get into just some of the other items. So there are two parts of this event. The first part is the panel discussion. We understand that you might want to dive deeper into some of the topics and anecdotes that are discussed. And so we'll do our best to send those questions to the moderator, Nacho. But in the event that your question is not asked, we'll be doing breakout rooms at 4 p.m. So there'll be the panel discussion from 3 to 4, and then right around 4 o'clock, we'll open up the breakout room so that you can have more, you can answer those, ask those questions, I'm sorry. And so each breakout room will feature one of the panelists. So those links should have been sent to you via your confirmation emails, but we'll also drop them in the chat later on. Next up is, we just want to thank, again, this was a collaborative process. So thank you to our colleagues at the MIT Alumni Association and Sloan's Office of External Relations for helping us identify the panelists for this event today, and also the emerging engineering social change events that will happen in March and in future semesters. And last and most important, thank you to our panelists, Ashil, Humera, Stephanie, and William, who have helped us in so many ways putting this event together. You've helped shape and sharpen this event in many ways. We're grateful for you today and your willingness to share your time and talents with all of our participants today. So I'm going to just end that poll real quick. So thank you to you. And really quick, we just want to also get to another important piece, which is our land acknowledgement. So can everybody see that? Sorry, hold on one second. Okay. All right. So, you know, part of acknowledging the land acknowledgements is basically, you know, it's the first step to honoring the folks who are the traditional stewards of the land that MIT sits on. And so in that spirit, we acknowledge the indigenous peoples as the traditional stewards of the land where each of us are today, virtually or physically, and the enduring relationship that exists between them and their traditional territories. The land on which MIT sits today is the traditional unceded territory of the Wampanoag Nation. We want to specifically acknowledge the painful history of genocide and forced removal from this territory. And we honor and respect the many diverse indigenous people connected to this land on which we gather from time immemorial. And so this statement was created by IPAC, which is one of the student organizations on campus. And we are thankful to them, and again, thankful to the original stewards of our land. With that said, let's jump into our discussion. Nacho, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you, Austin, for all of that, and welcome everybody to this first panel on racial equity in the workplace. This is an extremely important topic, as you guys all know, and that's why you're here. And hopefully we can enlighten you on some of the issues and stories of minorities in the workplace, and hopefully empower you with some useful tips, advice, and things you can use to better navigate that and affect change. So before I get to letting the panelists introduce themselves, I first want to give a clear shout out to the MIT students in the audience. Everybody here on this panel has been at MIT or is at MIT. And so we are extremely excited to have you guys here with us to discuss this very important topic. And so now for our panelists, I will ask you guys to introduce yourselves. And in your introductions, if you could include your name, your school or major or course at MIT, or just what your MIT affiliation was, then your current role and where you are right now. And then just a really quick reflection on why you decided to be on today's panel and why is this discussion important. So Will, if you could start us off, and then you guys can go after that.
All right, thanks, Nacho. So I'm William Little. I'm currently a senior at MIT in course 15, studying finance. Right now, I'm an equity research associate analyst at T. Rowe Price, and I'm working remote, and then I'll be working in Baltimore post-graduation. And I'm here because these conversations are really important, and I think it's really important to make sure that we're getting as many unique perspectives as possible and trying to help each other really understand why we're having these conversations and helping each other grow from them.
Thanks for that, Will. Ashil, you want to go next?
Okay, thank you. Thank you for inviting me also, and thank you for all the participants and the listeners. My name is Ashil Mesak. I spent about 7.5 years at MIT getting my bachelor's, master's, and PhD in aerospace, aeronautical and astronautical engineering. I would like to say that during those years, I had a grand total of 0 Black professors over that period of time. And unfortunately, I see that it hasn't changed meaningfully over those decades. My role, I am a professor of engineering, and what is there to know about me is that my leadership has been about in the roles of dean, chair, and other areas in industry as well. But the main thing that I would like that you can find out about me is that in everything that I do, I try to advance the performance of the institution while increasing diversity. And those two things happen in tandem. They don't happen as a compromise, one from the other. And that is the case. That's something to know. And in the way I speak, I essentially look at the term BIPOC or minorities in the same way. We could have a good debate about that, but we are all fighting for the same thing. That's the main thing. I'll stop there.
Thank you for that, Ashil. Stephanie, do you want to go next?
Sure. My name is, can you hear me?
We can hear you. Yeah.
Okay. So I'm Stephanie Oginen Preston. I am MIT Sloan class of 2008, Caribbean Ocean R. My current role is I am Chief of Staff to the United States Business Unit Chief Financial Officer for Takeda Pharmaceuticals. Immediately prior to that, I was COO, Chief Operating Officer for Digital Transformation for Citizens Bank. I am based in Providence, Rhode Island, so I live in the promised land, just so that we know Providence is the province land. Why I decided to join this discussion much is like when my husband and I decided to be foster parents. We were foster parents from 2009 to 2010. We have 3 biological children. And the reason we wanted to become foster parents was to be sure that folks knew we existed. So a family that Black, brown, BIPOC family that actually could help. If my mother was on this call, she would say, I do this because I was a middle child of 3 kids and I just need the attention, but that's not true. And I will end with, I am classically invested in the sociology and psychology of what it means to be me in this universe. I am a Gen X. I'm the middle child. I'm a connector by nature. I'm a daughter of an immigrant as well as an American Indian from the Narragansett Wampanoag tribe. But I'm not a unicorn. Like, we exist, and if I challenge myself to be sure that whenever I can, I give back in a way like this.
Well, we appreciate you giving back. Thank you for that. And Humera, last but not least.
Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for having me. Nacho, Austin, all of you are like the panelists, certainly all the participants. So let's see, my name is Humera Khan, and I got my first 4 degrees from MIT. So I have undergraduate degrees in 22 and 4, which for those of you who have forgotten is nuclear engineering and art and design. And my master's degrees are in 22 and TPP, which is nuclear engineering and also in technology and policy. And I am currently the president of an organization that's set up some 10 years ago. And the focus of that is very specifically on how do you fight hate and extremism, and how do you stop people from actually joining extremist groups. So of course, as you might imagine, the focus right now, and a lot of what we're doing right now, is actually around domestic terrorism. And let's see, currently in New York, we'll be moving back to DC in a couple of months. And before, and actually most recently, actually before the past couple of years, I've actually been working at the United Nations Security Council in the Counterterrorism Directorate. So very involved in that policy, national security and policy space. And why I was looking forward to this panel, it comes down to, we can't deal with the issues until we talk about them. And so we just have to address them, and we can't pretend that they don't exist. And they're real, and we see them and face them in so many different ways. It doesn't matter how far you are in your career, you see them, at the beginning of your career, you see them, and they certainly evolved over time, but we really need to understand where things are if we are hoping that anything will get better. And I am hoping that just like all of you, we will all be a part of that change.
Thank you for that. And thank you all the panelists for sharing your experiences. And as you guys can see, we have a very accomplished panel. And so I'm extremely excited to hear their insights on the questions I'll be asking soon. And before I start asking the questions that will kind of guide our conversation today, there are some terms that we need to align on. We have to have a shared language and shared definitions that are essential to us growing and learning together. So the first term you'll be hearing a lot is BIPOC, which means Black, Indigenous, and people of color. And so when you hear that term, just know that those are the groups that are referred to when we say that. And the second term that I wanted to talk about and get some insights from the panelists as well was this term of equity. And we hear it a lot, and we hear equity as a good thing. But, and Stephanie, if you could get us started with this one, like what does equity mean in theory, and then what does it actually mean in practice when we see equity in the workplace?
Sure. So when I reflect on this question, I thought of two things, and it's great that you parse them out. What is theory and what is in practice? So in theory, I think people conflate equity with equality. And I'm sure now, but I will reflect so that we're unified on the visual that says equality, not equity, is giving everybody, if we're standing in front of a fence, giving everybody a crate to stand on in order to see over the fence. And if you haven't seen that visual, I'm hoping that my words create it. It's, yeah, there's a fence in front of us, and in order to create equity, or at least the theory behind equity, we put each person on a crate. That pictorial goes further in saying, well, no, this is very funny. I'm a 6'3" Black woman, so I can see over the fence regardless of a crate. So stand me up against the fence, regardless of what we're trying to do for BIPOC or our past inequities. I naturally, as a 6'3" foot person, can see over a 5'4" fence. And then you get to equity. So you move past equality, you get to equity. If my 5'4" friend is standing next to me and I receive a crate and they receive a crate, we're both equal, but it's not equitable. I'll fast forward that visual, if you can see it in your mind, to say what really is the case around equity is that everyone gets what they need. So if I'm 6'3", I actually don't need a crate, but my 5'4" counterpart does. I, in this analogy, am a white cisgender male, and we have to recognize that they are 6'3" in an environment that has a fence in front of them with 5'4" people to their right or left. I'll end with saying that actually, I'll end actually two ways. One, I wrote my Sloan essay around, imagine if for 400 years we gave me 5 jelly beans and my counterpart, whomever they are, 1 jelly bean for 400 years. And then we said, well, that's not right. That's what the nation said. That's not right. So we said we should make sure that they each get a jelly bean each. We should make this equal. What it doesn't figure out is for 400 years, I received 5 times as much as my peer. And that's actually what equity means. It may seem inequitable to then just switch it. Oh, you get 5 jelly beans because your counterpart got one for 400 years. But there's something that needs to be addressed in the fact that I'm sitting on a mountain of jelly beans when we said, oh, that is not fair. I will end with really what, I hope in my lifetime we do is remove the fence and remove the mountain of or distribute the mountain of jelly beans. And the nation and the world haven't figured out how to do those things to achieve real equity. I'm happy to be challenged. I'm an analogy geek. So if none of that made sense, I am happy to choose other ways to describe it. But those are the ways that I describe a fence, an advantage, and a way to look at history as privilege.
Totally. And Stephanie, I definitely got that. And I think you made such a powerful point that, equality right now is not sufficient if we don't observe and acknowledge the historical deficits and setbacks and really account for those things. So that's a really great point. And I think we've really set a good framework for how we can look at equity as we discuss racial equity on this panel. And so my first question is, kind of talking about the beginning part. So we want racial equity. So that means actually bringing in diverse candidates, bringing in BIPOCs into the workplace. And so for Humera, my first question is, what are some of the challenges and considerations for BIPOC candidates and employees, and what do they kind of deal with having to interview and eventually enter the workplace?
So let me start with, thank you for the question, but let me start with telling you where I entered the workforce. And this is more than 20 years ago. Let me be upfront, right? I'm not Black. So my experience is very specific to my world. And honestly, I come from a place of privilege, right? And so there's everyone has a different experience. And it's one of those things you learn as you go through it. So when I first started, right, I graduated, I had my degrees, right? And then like every one of us, you think you're like, the best thing since sliced bread. Of course, you'll get a job, right? You're so full of yourself, right? You're an MIT graduate, you've done well, etc. And then comes reality, because then you start interviewing. And I think the one of the experiences for me was, had a great interview. At the end of it, the person walked me out at the right, and in fact, out the door, went downstairs to the building, entrance of the building, and then said, "You're the perfect candidate for us, but we can't take you because we deal with the old boys network, and they won't hear anything coming out of your mouth." And I thought, okay, surprise. But I think the incident which really was defining for me was different interview, went through various stages. The first three, talked to everyone in the company, went all the way, talked to the CEO. He was talking about when I should be starting, right? And so the last part of this was then talking to the human resources manager. Did that, talked to the person, and then didn't hear back, right? So called up the recruiter who had been the go-between in all of this. And they're like, and it was a new person. The person who had been handling my file was just a new person. So I'm like, okay, maybe something dropped, something changed. And they're like, no, sorry, not interested. That evening, I got a call from that recruiter, and this was after hours. And she said, the human resources manager had called up the company and complained about how dare they send a candidate who looks like me to the firm. The person who was managing, the actual recruiter who was managing my file, had stood up and said, no, that's not okay. He got fired. And so they handed my file to another recruiter, and she was crying on the phone as she was telling me, I can't afford to lose this job. Can you just sort of go away? Can you not push it? And that was this rude awakening, right? Because it's not about who you are or what you know and what skill set you're bringing in. It's literally a matter of what you look like, or what the assumptions about you, the stereotypes about you. And that was enough to just not even get the job. And this is after going through the whole process. And it was, I mean, one of the things, I mean, eventually, obviously, I got a job, right? But getting the foot in the door was very hard, much harder than I ever thought possible. And I think one thing you figure out is that it's not a level playing field, right? Once you're in the door, then you have the opportunity to prove yourself. And then you still have to work harder than everyone else to prove that you are as good as everyone else. But then there's a lot more doors which open, but also you start to build out your network. But without that, it actually can be. Now, I am hoping that things have changed considerably over the past close to 25 years. But certainly that experience, right, is when you realize it's not just, there's such deep prejudice about people and such deep stereotypes that you just can't it's not just the same as someone who has a very different sort of privilege. And this is a place, but again, it's not that everyone is like that, right? Because I can also describe another job interview. Went in there, had and this is for the second job I ever had. And the questions I was asked, normally when you interview in DC, right, you're wearing like usually a gray or navy blue or black suit, something dark, something which looks sober to prove that, I'm a serious candidate. Did that, right? Went in and I got asked questions like, are you allowed to wear any color other than black? They ask about what my father did. Every question you think that you're not allowed to ask, I was asked. So I thought, okay, this one's not happening, right? I got a call. They called back and said, can you start right away? This is after about 2 weeks. Went in there and I found out they had fired a person to hire me. And so it was, again, a surprise. And then you realize that, okay, people, like you have to, just like people make assumptions about minorities, we have to make sure we don't assume that everyone is going to do that, because it is about, there's things which are systemic, but then you do have individuals who are not part of that system, and they can help and they will help. And so, but there's a lot of work which has to be done, and you have to figure out when you're going to fight, right? And when do you have the luxury to actually do that? Because sometimes we just don't have that luxury, because reality and circumstances are such that at that point in time, all you have to do is just make sure that you are okay, right? Before you can, and strengthen yourself before you can actually stand up to do anything about the system. And you can't do it without allies. And so there's this whole like network and whole, like, it's not just one person, right? There's so many of us, and every one of us has a role. So the networks are going to be really important, right? They're going to be very important to see you for who you are and what you bring to the table, and not just like close the door because you don't look like theirs.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that story. And I'm sure many have very similar stories. And I just really want to highlight the fact that, education is good, but it doesn't save a lot of people from the prejudices and challenges coming into the workforce, especially as a BIPOC. And, that's a great transition into my next question for you, Will, is that, you're early in your career, and what is some of the advice you've heard to kind of combat some of these challenges that a lot of people do face entering the workforce?
Yeah, of course. So the main thing they've talked about is really trying to put in explicit effort to not only make sure you're doing the job to the best of your ability, but also building that surrounding network around you. Because at the end of the day, one thing that is just natural for people is that you're more likely to be positively biased towards somebody that's like yourself. While the generation before me has done a really good job of, fighting over these barriers and these stories, like we just heard, to get in the workforce, they're there, but there aren't that many of them in a lot of places. So it's about getting the next, like once we're in the building, because they helped us get there, it becomes the next role where we have to stay in the building and really make sure that we're doing a good job of trying to get promoted. If it's me versus somebody that has the same ability as me, and I don't look like the people that are making the hiring decision, I need to make sure that those people don't have, are making that decision off of purely biased information. I really have to make sure that they see the work product that I've put out, so that they know who I am as an individual rather than trying to kind of pigeonhole me in what they've seen as like African American males in the media. So just being really conscious of that and doing the work to make sure that people are seeing through those stereotypes.
Thank you for that, Will. Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And I've definitely heard a lot of that same advice being early in my career as well. And before I move on to the next question, I'm curious for either Humera, Ashil, or Stephanie, have you guys, what advice did you hear earlier in your career and what do you think kind of worked and what didn't work?
Okay, I guess so in terms of advice early in the career, some of them are pretty much well-known advice. And I heard that a second ago from Yumira in terms of plan and expect to do a whole lot better than the next person with, next to you to get to the same place. So it's just a fact, okay? It is just a plain fact. You will have to prove yourself and prove yourself again and again. And also expect to be lonely. if you see what I mean. The higher you get, the lonelier it gets, not in the generic sense that anybody can say, but especially for minorities. I can tell you that, okay, almost everywhere I go in any high level thing, I'm the only one. And you better get used to it. Whether I'm on a board of a $600 billion company, I'm the only one. Whether I became dean in Mississippi, not only was I the only one, I was the first one in the history of the state in terms of non-minority universities. So expect the curse of low expectation also, because people will expect that you will not perform. And when you perform, they may be surprised. And also importantly, as again, Yumira just said, do assume that just by looking at someone, you have no idea which way you should think, because you can see someone and they are genuinely embracing you and eager to help and be a good person and be a positive force in your life. At the same time, you may see somebody who looks exactly the same, and they just want to have no part of you. And they want to move the other way and kick you the other side. So don't make any assumptions. Expect to work extremely hard. Expect that things will be hard. And in the aerospace industry, I have been there for 30 years. Unfortunately, I'm going to be disagreeing a slightly bit with maybe not disagreeing, but a different angle. Things have not changed. Okay, things have not changed. I became fellow of that society, joined the board, which is essentially the highest level you can go there. But I look around me and I see almost the same thing. Where it has changed positively is in the gender side, on the gender side. And as I climbed up, I made the point to help a lot of people, and they did climb. But as we stand right now, it's not anywhere close to, I could say so much more. I'll stop there.
No, thank you for all of that. And, it's great to hear all the advice you guys have had and, what has kind of came to fruition and what hasn't. And I hope it's helpful for the people in the audience. And Ashil, I want to ask you another question, which is kind of a different route. So we talk a lot about recruiting diversity, recruiting BIPOCs, but could you talk about the importance of incubating diversity, right? It's not just going in and finding talented people, but also making sure that everybody has opportunity and has those talents being incubated. So can you talk a little bit about that?
That is so very, very important, Nacho. I can speak I spent about 10 years at RPI. During that time, I was the second full professor. When I left 10 years later, I left the same single full professor over 10 years. Not a single new one was promoted. We did bring in many assistant professors, but the environment, again, that's the other thing. They were superbly top-notch. They would not have been hired. RPI is a serious school. They were top-notch incoming assistant professors, but not a single one climbed to become full professors. And during my own promotion, I'll say that it was a bit of a challenge, even though my record was definitely as well or much better than anybody than other people in my department. But I did get promoted, and then okay, here is the situation. Even though the environment was such that it is a challenge, I was elected to be president of the Faculty Senate by my colleagues. So you have to really think of it both ways. On the one hand, there are serious challenges. On the other hand, when you prove yourself, there is a lot of opportunity to change things for the better. But again, in the interest of time, I'll stop there.
No, I think that was great. And I kind of on this subject, Will, if you don't mind sharing, how do you feel like your talent has been incubated, right? You're kind of the earliest in your career. So I'm curious as to your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so one thing that I'll say is that there's been a lot more diversity recruiting where a lot of different companies will either fly people out or at least now hold virtual events designed specifically for minorities to, join and then learn more about the companies and then get on the accelerated track to apply. But I will say that after these initial steps, I guess, if you know about them, once you're in the workplace, there isn't as much support. And that's probably why we see, not much changing in the higher ranks, right? Like having people that are minorities getting hired looks really good for the numbers. But in terms of impact on the company's performance or impact on, how much minorities have, positions of power within companies, it's really the same. So just something to think about is how we can get from, point A to point B, where we're actually genuinely trying to improve these workplaces and make them more diverse. Because people are going to have to actually try to make this happen. Like you don't accidentally get diversity. If you keep doing things the same way as you have them before, things are just going to stay the same. So you have to actively make the place different so that you can have more perspectives. And then, having more perspectives in the room is going to help you have a better result. So it's not even just about giving everyone a seat at the table. It's about making the table better. Like having diversity is a good thing that will, help performance. So I don't know. It's something.
Quickly add something very quickly along the very same question. Let me add to amplify what you just said. While at Syracuse, at RPI, I was acting department chair, but it wasn't my responsibility yet to take care of that. But when I went to Syracuse University, we had never hired a minority member in the faculty at all, ever. And I was the first one they hired. And I said, we're going to change that. But the point that I want to make very quickly here is that by changing the environment, which is exactly your point, we went from 0 diversity to 25% diversity in less than 3 years. And during that time, the performance went way up. I'll stop there.
Right. It's like the difference between searching in a pond and then searching in the ocean. Like if you're looking in the ocean, there's going to be more big fish that, that will be better. So
For sure, for sure. I appreciate those insights. Humira, Stephanie, anything you guys have on, incubating diversity? I feel like this is a topic that's kind of lighting up all of us. So would love to hear your thoughts if you have them.
Uh, um, so really appreciated the comment that the higher you get, the lonelier you get, because definitely, I mean, there is no way around it. And I can't speak for academia or engineering. My space has been in terms of security and policy. And let me say that I am literally like, I am like the checkbox, right? Oh, did you get your gender? Did you get your minority? Did you get your color, right? Oh, look, she meets them all, right? So it's there, and then you get those off comments about, oh, it's so good to see a person like you here, and you're like, yeah, right. Why? And then the other one is, so I think one of the things which is how do you also make sure that there's a space where people can advocate for themselves? Because you're in this situation where it's not just enough to do the same as, right? You have to do more than. And the question is, who's also going to advocate for you? And you have to be able, and that's the thing, that's another expectation, right? It's not just that you need your network to support you, you also end up having to advocate for yourself in a way that you don't necessarily, because otherwise it won't happen, right? And that's something which is a different phenomenon, and I don't know whether it's based on race or gender or which mix of that it plays out to, but certainly being heard is something which you have to be, again, very, you have to get strong at that. And part of that is then being confident in yourself. There's no place for like the imposter syndrome. There's just no, you don't have, it's again, that's a luxury you don't have, right? You have to recognize that, yeah, I am good. I know what I'm doing. Yes, I am an expert. I'm an internationally known expert. Deal with it. Right? It's not, that's your problem that you have an issue with me being there, not my problem. And I'm just going to do my job, and I'm going to be very, like, I don't have to hold myself back on that. And that's when you hear the thank you for your candor. Those are the other comments you hear, but you still have to keep going. So it's part of that, like there's all these other skill sets which are needed if you are a minority in the workplace, which is above and beyond just your performance. It's not just about the leadership, but it's also about how you're going to navigate some of these situations, right? Which only you are going to experience. And if you're one of the very few who is over there, you're not going to have as many mentors or people who have experienced the same, right? And then the question is, and that's a huge part of it, like you don't see like who's going to help you if they don't even know what you're talking about. They never experienced those things themselves. So again, essential that, again, open doors, help people, but once they're through that door, that there is the support they need through every step of the way.
For sure. I think that's really great. And kind of the subject is coming up is that, we're bringing in minorities to the workplace, but these environments aren't conducive to success. And obviously, we're all here because we've kind of overcome that and have accomplished despite that. But Stephanie, I'm wondering what can make for a workplace more conducive for success for minorities? Like, what are the specifics that need to be done if we're looking towards at more equitable workplaces going into the future?
Yeah, so thanks for the question. And I think that what I'll just reflect on is what I've seen work. So I was in retail banking finance. I obviously went to Sloan. I was in grocery supermarket industry. I was an independent consultant. I was a part of a startup. I went back to commercial finance, and I'm now in the pharmaceutical industry. So I am a generalist by nature. My background is diverse by nature. I've always had a chief of staff role. I say all that just to give context to my comments around what works. Oh, I also am raising 3 daughters who are 16, 12, and 10, 3 different divisions, 3 different schools. So I'm also getting, I am a brown girl getting to raise brown girls in a variety of educational institutions. So take all of that into context around what I have seen work. I'll say 3 things I love the power of 3. First, for my daughters, I have seen what works is when they get the space to be uniquely them. And and it's so funny, there's nothing unique about them. But when they get to experience being quote unquote normal, or to have their hair, their culture, their background, where they grew up. We're in an inner city where they're in environments where those things are seen as assets, that works. Not detriments, not reason that you're gonna fail in life, not, but just as who you are. I know that works. I know that that background works. I know it worked for me. It lifted me, not out of, but because of my background. As I mentioned in the beginning, I'm a daughter of an immigrant, and I grew up in a low income environment, but there's nothing about that had to be this check mark or barometer of success. It took me until I went to MIT to say that I was a smart person, and that's something that shouldn't happen to a kid. It should, if a kid is smart, like they shouldn't have to be 28 years old to welcome that. The second thing that I will say in your question is, you know, in my professional career, I have needed mentors and guidance, and I needed a headwind. I needed mentorship and guidance. And I was a young professional, just like any other professional. But in order to get my job, I had to be a superwoman, and that was a problem. Like it really is a problem that I have to have a double major from Duke and a degree from MIT to have the same kind of career as peers. And lastly, I'll say we have to recognize that there's a trauma associated with that. And I don't mean to use a charged word. But I do mean to elevate that, only because I love to be authentic. In my career, I have had a colleague call human resources on me falsely to state that I traumatized that, like, absolutely false claim, but use their power to try and diminish my career. And that hurts. And it hurts for the executive vice presidents to have to think about or even ask who is right. And for me to know that I'm falsely accused and have to show up tomorrow and be still twice as good, that's the way I would answer your question. Is I'm entering society as a mother, as a coworker, as an individual, and these things are literally happening to me.
Totally. Thank you again for those stories. And I hope anybody in the audience who has the power to start instilling some of those changes kind of really listens to that and tries to implement those lessons from what Stephanie just said. One quick point, we're almost at the end, but there will be breakout rooms after. So definitely join the breakout rooms and ask those questions that you have after that. But the last question, and this will be for you, Humera, but I think everybody will want to kind of chime in, is the concept of diversity leadership, right? And I look at this in two ways. One, it's any person who is a BIPOC in a company feeling like they can be a leader, having that empowered mentality of speaking up in the boardroom, speaking up in meetings, things like that. But also like having minorities in C-suite, having minorities as managers. So there's the structural side and there's the mentality side as well. And so I'm wondering, what are your thoughts on the best ways we can kind of push for more BIPOC leadership in our organizations?
Um, so it has to go in both the structural aspects. You have to do it because again, the discrimination and the bias is systemic. So that has to be addressed. And then there's also the bottom-up pieces, right? Where we have to make sure that individuals, also the people coming in, one, they know what they're going to be dealing with, and then how do you support them? One of the things which, and this comes as when you're at the table, right? When you have been invited to the table, and some of us are, is what do you do then? Are you going to stand up for principle? Right? Are you going to speak up for the issues, and or are you going to try and protect your place at the table? And the thing is that it's hardest to fight when you have something to lose. When you have nothing to lose, your back is up against the wall, it's easy to fight, right? When you have so much that it doesn't matter, it's fine. But when you do have something to lose, then the question is, can each of us stand up for principle, even when it gets hard? And that means when you're at the table, you are not there just for you, right? And recognizing that you are going to have to, it's not just a maybe kind of sort of, you have to then bring others with you, right? And you have to stand up for the issues as they are, not in this idealized way where, so that you get to stay at the table. Because there is this assumption, and it's true in some cases, that if you hold on to value, you'll never be invited back, right? That's what people are scared of. Will I ever be invited back? If I really stand up for what I believe, will I be invited back? And you know what? You have to anyway, even if you're not invited back. It's what we have to, like, because it goes back to, we have to live the values we want to see. And it's just essential that we do that. And so it's where every single one of us has to show that leadership, right? Every single one of us has to stand up for that. And at the same time, we are going to have to change the system, and we have to work towards changing the system, because not every one of us has a different role, right? And not everyone can actually just fight the system all the time. But we have to be able to, once we have that position, then let us fight for those people who are unable to fight for themselves. And let's open those doors so that they can actually come through. And again, as I said before, it's not a level playing field, but can we make it, as Stephanie said, more equitable? And every little piece we do for it, essential. And every single one of us here, every panelist, every attendee, we have a role, because what we have is we do have certain privileges because of our education, because we do carry some labels which others simply don't have. And they go a long way.
That was super powerful. Thank you for that. Ashil, any thoughts?
No, I would essentially second the thoughts that you just articulated, Humera, very much. I think that it comes to seeking deep in your soul to decide that you must fight for some things. And even with the concomitant risks that it entails. And sometimes those risks will come to pass. And that's okay. Because 10 years later, you wake up in the morning, you say, I followed my values. And that's a good thing. Whether it be, another thing that's very important to notice is that just because you have a minority at the top doesn't necessarily mean that many things can happen, because sometimes the minority member will himself or herself be shy about making changes. And we could think about some of that even with Obama. His heart wanted to do a lot of things, but ultimately there are many things that he couldn't do, especially since the very beginning, he had some problems with a professor at Howard University, at Harvard University. So, and Nixon going to China. So sometimes, unless the person is bold, things don't happen. Having said that, the lack of minorities at the very top is a serious hindrance to the young ones coming up. Because if they look up and they don't see themselves at the leadership level, it's very hard to imagine how they go there. So those on top have a very serious responsibility to act accordingly because they got there in some fashion. And those institutions who are in charge of what's happening in the country as a whole, especially at this juncture in our national discourse. Many companies are talking a good game, but unless they follow through, they are doing a serious disservice to the country. So my point is that minorities should be at the top in proportion, and they should be bold enough to take the right decisions, to make the right decisions. Otherwise, they do a disservice themselves to the community. So that as a young person graduates and wants to take on the world, he or she can look up and say, I want to be like this person.
That was a great closing to this panel and just such great points. And thank you again, firstly, all the attendees for taking this hour out of, I'm sure, your busy days to be here and really get this information and kind of be part of this movement that we're all trying to do towards equity. And thank you again, panelists, for being here and just dropping so many dimes. I'm so happy you guys were here and, you know, shared this information. And now I'll give it to Natalie to introduce the breakout rooms.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you all for joining us. So as we have been charged with, we all have a voice. We all have a role in creating social change. So we're going to move to the breakout rooms. We're going to share in the chat which breakout rooms to join. We'll be there with you as well. So we hope to see more of you. And next month, be on the lookout for more discussion, more conversation around social change. So if you're not on our LinkedIn account, please join us on LinkedIn to find out more information. Thank you all for joining and have a splendid Black History Month. Take care.